Hi, hi, hi. I see folks logging in. Welcome. We're so excited to have you with us. We'll give folks just another minute. All right. Welcome, welcome, welcome to our spring family town hall. We are so excited to be here with all of you. I'm sure you all know this, but I am Emily Carson, the very, very proud head of school here at Harlem Hebrew. And I'm really excited to be joined tonight by Hebrew Public's Chief Executive Officer, John Rosenberg, our Chief Schools Officer, Emily Fernandez. And though he is only with us in spirit, Jonathan Worley, our Chief Operating Officer, did help us prepare this, and John will do it with some speaking on his behalf. We're really, really excited to have our families with us tonight. We have some families who are with us, we have some future families, and all of you, welcome. We're excited to be here. Here's a little preview of how we're going to be spending our time together this evening. We're going to start with just a recap of our response to COVID and most importantly, what we've learned throughout this entire process in the last year. We're going to talk about our spring reopening plan, which is coming very, very soon, and we're so excited about it. And we're also going to do a little bit of looking ahead to summer and the 2021-2022 school year. And so with that, I'm going to pass it right over to our fearless CEO, John Rosenberg.
Thank you, Emily. Very much appreciate it. And again, greetings to those who are with us tonight. Also want to note that we're recording this town hall tonight, and we'll be making it available to prospective families, current families, so folks who aren't able to attend, we'll make sure they have access to it as well. Up here on the slide, for those of you who are on video, you can see our organization's mission and our values. I want to just share that we all have felt what an unbelievably hard year this has been. And we're now in the 13th month of this pandemic. We know that it's really taken a toll on families, on children, on each of you. It has certainly also taken a toll on our family of staff and the whole Hebrew public community. So our hearts go out to you. We're here for you, just as we've tried to be here for each other. We're going to be sharing our individual emails with you in a little bit later on this evening. We want to make sure you have those and that any of you, prospective or current families, can contact us with questions at any time. We've really tried to lean hard on our organizational values of problem solving and being a learning organization, communicating in aware and comprehensive ways with you, being transparent and thoughtful about our decision making so that together we can make a difference in making sure that children are able to thrive despite how hard things are in the world around us right now. And with that, let me hand it over to our other Emily, Emily Fernandez, our Chief Schools Officer.
Thank you, John, and good evening, everyone. I am Emily Fernandez, Chief Schools Officer. I work quite closely with all of our heads of school, including Miss Emily here at Harlem Hebrew. And of course, I work with our network team on longer term programmatic planning. I'm going to start with just a recap of how we responded to COVID-19 when we were brought into a new reality last March. So you'll see on the screen a timeline of our school closure. We did close all of our schools on March 13th. That Friday, we announced that we were going to close, and we were able to pick right up with instruction the following week remotely, which I'm very grateful to everything our school teams did to make that happen. A real hustle to switch from the only type of school we've known of in-person school to remote options for everyone. We were able to distribute technology starting that Tuesday, getting devices into families' hands. And we've continued that throughout this whole time, including replacing devices. We know that access to technology is access to education right now, and we want to make sure that that is not a barrier. We also were able to launch Camp Hebrew Public, a super fun, really neat way to kind of maintain community and connectivity and address the social emotional parts of our children and our communities. I'll say a little bit more about that on the next slide, but it's really neat with all of our schools, including our affiliate schools, and a chance for kids and families to come together, from Hebrew read alouds to Israeli cooking, just some really neat things there. We reopened in September, at which point we had options for hybrid and remote. We felt that that was extremely important to be able to offer both of those at the highest quality that we possibly could to our families, so that people could make the choice that was right for them at that time. And of course, we had times for families to opt back into hybrid. We've had two additional cycles of rostering choices, so that families had multiple times after that first time. So 3 times this year, families have been able to say, I want my child in school, or I want my child fully remote, in the building, or fully remote. And each time there's some small changes, be it potentially an adjustment in teacher, although much less so here at Harlem, by the way that Emily Carson has organized the schedule, so that for the most part, teachers, students, particularly in the upper grades, are able to have their same teacher, be them if they're in remote or hybrid, to even, continuing the learning across remote program and hybrid program. So these teachers plan together, our school leaders work with all teams of teachers, and we use the same curriculum, even though the schedule might be different and the exact place might be different. So I'll talk a bit more about that, but I just want to name that as people are thinking about what does it look like for kids to change program options at this point. And this is, again, the 3rd time that we have offered that option. In December, we made a pretty difficult choice to close our our hybrid learning program. And there were, I'm sure folks remember what the city felt like at that time. We were coming out of Thanksgiving and heading into another stretch of holidays, and we were seeing spikes in cases, and it was really quite concerning. And we were beginning to experience some of the unpredictability of opening and closing schools, as well as, frankly, the greater challenge of being able to staff our in-person options when we were experiencing the number of folks who needed to quarantine, or who unfortunately had been exposed, or any number of these things, and having to make sure that we kept everyone safe. We were running out of our full staff in the building. And so we made a really difficult choice to close at that point, and have switched to fully remote and really focused on trying to improve that in the last 2.5, 3 months. And now we are here, where we are looking to open again, very excited, in just really one school week after tomorrow. I'll take the next slide, please. So 2 aspects of our response, just to dive a teeny bit deeper. In education, the education aspect part of it, we absolutely looked at having hybrid and remote, and having both options there. And you should know that we have teachers who are dedicated to leading remote classrooms. We don't have children zooming into a classroom that's happening in a school building far away from them, right? So our kids who are remote only have a teacher who is teaching a class of remote only kids. We know not all schools have chosen to do that. We grappled with it. It does cause a stretch of resources, but we believed it was important. So our remote only kids got the attention that they deserved, if that was the choice that was right for them and their family. And of course, with our hybrid programming, we really try to maximize every minute we could. Even, looking ahead to returning, Miss Carson has worked with her leadership team and has decreased the time of arrival so that we can get kids in the building a little bit earlier and get more time in class, learning, connecting, and having that social connection with kids, with other kids and teachers. It was a big choice of ours that we felt that we had to offer both. Also, so Network Academy, what I briefly referenced, but this was really a stretch of enrichment courses that were offered after school hours, totally optional, just like a fun enrichment way for kids to learn and explore their interests, and also to connect socially with kids from not just Harlem Hebrew, but all of our 4 managed schools, including Philadelphia, and with kids and families from our affiliate schools. So it's been really exciting. And when we talk about the summer, we're looking at ways to actually continue this again after this school year ends, throughout the summer, and potentially for the longer term. I think there's been so many benefits we've seen about coming out of that. And another aspect that I just want to highlight about our response before we switch into the health and safety aspect of our response, which obviously is critical, and John is going to take that, is our choice to make sure that we were able to partner with childcare programs for the families who need it. And as a mom of a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, this just resonates with me greatly, knowing that we were able to partner with King and offer subsidized childcare. So families were able to apply for scholarships, and still are families. If you're interested in a childcare spot with us, please, 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 you'll see our info at the end. Please email us. We would love to connect you with King and subsidize childcare if that would help your family in a critical way. And John, our CEO, really researched this and made sure that we got it in place with our operations teams to offer that to our families who needed it. So with that, I'm going to shift over to John on the next slide. Oh, but before I do, here's a couple of the smiling faces from our network academy. You'll see one of our former teachers doing a read aloud there of a Hebrew read aloud of the Hungry Hungry Caterpillar. And then we have one of our teachers from HLA there, Ms. Bosmat, doing Israeli dance. I mean, from her living room, just really energetic ways. We are a school, we're focused on academics, and we're focused on the whole child. And, it's something that we've talked about with families before of like, what does it look like during this time to make sure kids are getting just the social emotional stimulus that they need in order to get through this challenging time. Because I think it's challenging for all of us at all ages, but particularly our children. All right, now with that, I'll hand it over to John to talk a bit about the health and safety side of things.
Thank you, Emily. So the next couple of slides, I'm going to share a little bit about what we've learned and what the broader scientific community has learned in wrestling with a lot of hard choices and dealing with COVID. So first, in terms of our own direct experience, we've had, through the testing that we've done and through outside testing, a number of COVID cases among staff, among students, among family members of staff and students, or those who live with staff and students over the course of the year. And it's actually great that we've had testing in place and that people have been wonderful communicators with us in reporting that kind of information. However, we've had zero evidence, no indication at all that anyone has caught or transmitted COVID in any of our buildings. So I just want to again clarify that distinction. As far as we can tell, people are still coming down with COVID in the broader New York community. COVID rates are still actually quite high in New York City. They're higher in New York State than in most of the rest of the country still. But our schools, through the protocols that we're using, which I'll talk more about in a bit in terms of our plans going forward, because we're still using those same very good protocols. All the work we did around ventilation, all the mask wearing, all of those things have really been effective in preventing the transmission of COVID within our schools, whether from student to student, student to staff, staff to student, or staff to staff. We are also really, really careful around making sure that we communicate fully, clearly, effectively, if anything happens that the community really needs to know about in terms of a classroom, for example, needing to close for in-person for a period of time. If I can have the next slide, please. Our experience is mirrored in the broader research. Right? COVID has been with us for a little more than a year as a world, as a planet, and more data, more and more resources are focused on understanding it. And every week, it seems, there's a new important piece of data that comes out. So we've known or suspected for a while, but the data is now pretty clear that children are much less likely to spread COVID and are far less likely to become seriously ill from it. Death rates, serious illness rates among children are a small fraction of what they are, for example, among older adults, or even what they are among people, let's say, in their 30s. Second important piece of research is that the protocols, the health and safety measures that are recommended by the World Health Organization, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, state governments, New York City Department of Health, that they work. So some of those are individual measures that we help enforce, like everyone wearing a mask, right? Or washing hands frequently. Mask wearing, by the way, being the single most important individual safety measure as far as people's individual behaviors. But there are other things that are building wide, like the improvements we made to Harlem Hebrew's ventilation systems, our implementation of social distancing. These kinds of measures, which again, I'll go in a little bit more detail on a little later in tonight's hour together, they work across the country, they work across the world. And so transmission rates of COVID within school settings have been very, very rare. And that's even true in communities where the larger community has a very high rate of COVID. If I can have the next slide, please. Okay, I'm now going to hand it back to Emily Carson to share a little bit about the Harlem Hebrew's spring reopening plan.
John, thank you. I'm so excited for us to reopen back for our hybrid students. Our teachers have been quite at work getting ready and are continuing to work really hard to get ready. And I'm excited for us to talk a little bit right now about what that means. We are going to return to our in-building learning for grades pre-K to 8 on Monday, April 12th. For those families that have opted into our hybrid learning model, we saw that largely most of our families that were hybrid in the fall continued to keep their students in hybrid. And we had about 50 new students whose families chose for them to move back into the hybrid model. And it took some puzzling and some figuring out, but we were able to make it happen. And we're really, really excited about that. We also were able to make sure that our families who were hybrid in quarters 1 and 2 continue to have the same cohort days that they did in the fall. So we wanted to honor that choice and those systems and routines that families have already created. We're excited for our pre-K and K students. They'll be in the building 4 days a week. Grades 1 to 8 will have in-building program 2 days a week, either on Monday and Tuesday or Thursday and Friday. And our remote programming is going to continue without interruption. Students will have the same Hebrew teachers, even if they are switching from hybrid to remote. Hebrew will continue to be every day that you are remote. You can go to Hebrew class. Our kids who are going to be back in the building, Mora, Alona, and the Hebrew team are working on some hard copy resources that kids can work on during our arrival time, which is a little bit longer than previous years. And so we're excited to really just continue all of those things, particularly our very joyful Wednesdays that include Hugim and small groups for math and assemblies. And we're really excited to just continue those. And so with that, I'm going to pass it over to the other Emily, Emily Fernandez, who's going to talk a little bit more big picture on our focus on student progress.
Great, thank you. And I almost want you to say a little more about Hugim, because I know some folks, I hope our families know about that. Do you want to just say anything else about those groups and what they look like?
Yes, I would love to. So Hugim is, I actually could talk about Hugim all day, every day. And if our families who are current students, if you have not joined in on a Hugim class on Wednesday, I highly, highly encourage you. Hugim is an opportunity for us to continue Hebrew learning and also to extend Israeli studies, and also to create a space where kids across classrooms have the opportunity to interact with each other and have some student choice and expression, and do some of the just like fun, light, social, emotional learning. It's not graded. It is a fun and joyful place. And Hugim, it means club or enrichment in Hebrew. And our Hugim, our Hebrew teachers just decided what are the things that they are passionate about related to Israel and Israel studies. So it could be like working out, sort of in the style of the Israeli military, Israeli fashion, Israeli stories, the diversity within Israel, Israeli cooking. And our kids have the opportunity to choose which Hugim they're going to. And they go to these Hugims and they just have fun learning. And it is so joyful and so engaging. And we get to see our kids shine in special ways. We get to see the adults shine in special ways. And again, this is every Wednesday. And I highly encourage our families on Wednesday morning to take the opportunity to join in even. You can have your face visible on the camera and participate. We would love to have you.
Yeah, I know you can talk about that for a long time. And I, not to put you on the spot, but I just think it's such a neat thing. And frankly, it's also something that our Harlem team took it upon themselves and initiated to have this year, building on like a history of Hakeem prior in years prior at Harlem, and also our alum hour last year. And while we didn't direct schools, so to speak, to do this, this was something that Emily and Alona and the team at Harlem really believed was important and brought to life. So it's an exciting part. Okay, focusing on student progress. So in my work with all of our 4 schools, I really see 3 aspects of student progress that we have the opportunity to move on in the rest of the year. We still have 12 full weeks of school following spring break, and we want to make the most of them for our students to progress academically, socially, and emotionally. A couple things you're going to see. Some of this is familiar, right? We have consistent Harlem Hebrew staff dedicated to our remote only cohorts. There's no zooming into another teacher's class. There's no even having a teacher from another school, which is something that some networks or districts have done. Our Harlem students have Harlem teachers, and they're the same dedicated teachers for our remote only cohorts. One aspect of that we think is really important is the relationship. And I think there's plenty of studies around like how relationships with adults in schools benefit children. And we think that's even more important during this time. So wherever we can like maintain tight relationships, we're really trying to do that. Full in-person day, 4 days a week, available for kindergarten and pre-K. That should read. Hebrew small groups are going to continue for every child every week, as Miss Emily just mentioned earlier. And then we're also looking at individual support for students through ELA and math small groups. So ELA being in guided reading, or even whenever we have a regular ELA class, if possible, we have another teacher in the room and we split the classes into slightly smaller spaces within the room, slightly smaller groups, just really trying to look at where kids are individually. And one of the pieces we're using to support that is something you may have heard about, monthly quizzes. And so, and we had a question come in around this, and I do want to name that we are doing quizzes for our students around ELA and math. They are internal for our purposes as a school. Our teachers do incredible analysis of them. Our leaders first, Miss Emily runs with our leaders and Miss Stephanie through a pretty intense data day where they look at every kid's answers, they look for trends, they look for individual needs for an individual kid. Then they do work with these quizzes and the data with teachers. The teachers do the same type of deep dive. And this is really to address the fact that we know our kids are at all different places this year. That is true any year, and this is not any year. Our children are at even more varied learning places. Some kids have thrived in remote learning, some kids have not. Some kids have struggled with access. And so the purpose of our quizzes, and I want to be super clear, is to make sure we know where each child is academically and we can support them in whatever that next step is. We are not thinking that this is a normal year for kids. We know it's not. And so we are using that tool to understand where kids are at and to support them into what comes next. Similarly, we're looking at what I would say is kind of like, it's not academic, but it's this other part of children in school, which is attendance. And what does it look like to be there and to connect with other kids? And kids can do work independently at home, and they'd be missing out on a key part of school. Even through a Zoom screen, through a computer, there is a connection that's there. And we really believe attendance is pretty critical. So we've got a huge attendance monitoring initiative with Ms. Tahara taking the lead, and really looking at individual students and making sure we're supporting them and their families, and making sure that kids who are struggling to get to class, that we're supporting them and we figure out what they need and we get it to them. And then just continuing the community building and the social emotional learning that we would want to do any year, but that we know is like more critical now. So community meetings or assemblies, absolutely. I would suggest if families are able to push into those to take a look. I was a skeptic of a remote assembly when our school leaders first started launching these last spring. I was like, how do you do an assembly with over 100 kids, with 60, 70 kids on a computer and make it meaningful and joyful? And it is. They've really done some incredible things, our leaders. So our teachers, absolutely, I would urge you, if you can push into that, it's really great. And of course, continuing morning meeting and advisory every morning to start our day. And in some ways, I think that this is one of the core pieces of our schools, and it's a core piece of responsive classroom, which is a research-based approach to the way children develop, and the idea that consistent, predictable routines around community and socializing, around updates, around being greeted, the simple idea that every child is greeted every day, it's critical. And so we're looking at student progress these last 12 weeks. We do not think the year is over. We're planning for next year. You'll hear about that. And we know we've got a full 12 weeks with children, and we want to make progress in these 3 areas as much as possible. Next slide. Okay, so with our reopening, John took the health and safety guiding principles in our recap of how we approached it, but he's going to share just an update of how we're approaching reopening now.
Thank you, Emily. Just a little bit more in depth on this. One of the things, and sorry about the dog barking in the background, one of the challenges and joys of COVID, right, is uncontrolled background noise. One of the things that's become apparent to us is that families, parents and guardians of our children, have a wide range of perspectives and concerns. You are not all sitting there holding the same questions, the same anxieties, the same priorities. And so we have families that are eager to get their children back into school full time, and we have families that are really scared to send their children back to school. So I want to share, particularly for those who have some worries or questions about, is it safe, to let you know what we're doing. And I want to preface this by saying nothing is 100% safe. We cannot guarantee during a pandemic that all of the things we're doing are eliminating risk any more than we can eliminate risk for children or for each other just by going through life. What we can assure you, based on the data, based on all of the data from around the world and our very consistent and expert implementation of safety measures, is that our schools are as safe as anybody else's schools, maybe safer than a lot of the schools that are out there in terms of how well we're implementing this and in the shape that our building's in. So those measures include social distancing, making sure that there's enough distance between individuals over the course of the day, batching so that children only interact with a limited number of children and adults, so that if someone comes into school with a COVID case and we find out about it, it is maybe a classroom that shifts to remote or a few staff as opposed to the entire school. Making sure that our environment in the school, including ventilation, is clean and fresh air is getting recycled frequently, that hand sanitizer is available for everyone. Making sure that folks have masks, that they have what we're calling personal protective equipment, which is for the most part means masks. That we have rigorous screening and cleaning, and that we really, and this is only over the last couple of months as the vaccines have now become available, really pushing as hard as we can to help encourage our staff to get vaccinated, to bring resources and information to the table, and to really prioritize that so that an increasing number of our staff are vaccinated each week. In fact, we just held, not an hour ago, a community forum that we had a number of staff and parents attending, where we heard from 2 public health medical experts about the safety of these vaccines and their effectiveness. If I can have the next slide, please. So a few things there. Those of you who've chosen to come back for our in-person hybrid model, which Emily Carson and Emily Fernandez described so well, have to consent, and all of you have, so we appreciate that, to mandatory COVID testing for your children. We have on-site testing. We're paying a lot of money for it. There was a lawsuit that was recently won by the charter sector against the city because the city had been refusing to provide COVID testing to public charter schools, even though it was doing it for city district schools. It's going to be some time before the city starts implementing the testing itself in our schools. We're not letting that stop us. We continue to pay to have an on-site provider test students and test staff. And that's another layer of protection for us. Staff vaccination, which I've talked about, and making sure that we really behave appropriately and fully in responding to positive cases. One thing that's changing here that I want to emphasize, the city, schools, and us had been using a guideline in the fall where if there were 2 or more unrelated COVID cases, positive cases in a school, that the whole school would shut down for in-person for at least 10 days. We're not going to be doing that going forward. Scientist after scientist come forward and said, there's not a need to do that. There's not much transmission within schools. The cases are unrelated. There's no indication that you're creating an unsafe environment other than by making sure that those folks quarantine and people that they've had direct contact with are not in the building for an appropriate period of time. So we hope to see much less, hopefully none, of this cycle of opening and closing based on some positive cases. Okay, if I can have the next slide, please. One way that this sometimes gets described, whether you like cheese or not, or Swiss cheese or not, is as a Swiss cheese-based model of layers of mitigation. The idea being that COVID is spread mostly through viral particles in the air. And when you use masks, when you have distance between people, when you have fewer people in the building, when you have good ventilation and hand washing and cleaning, each of these things isn't perfect, but together, the odds of a given instance of the virus actually getting through in a high enough level to get somebody sick really drops to very close to 0. If I can have the next slide, please. Okay, so Emily, if you'll share a little bit about the assessments.
Yes. So I would say this is a part of our reopening plan that, we weren't sure what was going to happen with our state exams. For any of you who've been following it, they were waived last year. We had no math or ELA state exams or science or any of them last spring for grades 3 through 8. It was unclear whether or not they were going to happen this spring or if they were going to be adjusted further. And just a little over a week ago, last Tuesday, New York State announced that not only were we going to have them, which was decided federally, but that we were going to have them in a particular way. And they gave us dates and guidelines, and we jumped to it to make a plan. And so I want to give you some headlines about this. You received a letter this past Tuesday, a couple days ago, from Miss Emily with more details, and please feel free to reach out with questions, but I'm hopeful that we will be able to answer some of them tonight with this slide so that you feel clear about how the school is approaching testing in this very unique year. So there will be state assessments, math and ELA for grades 3 through 8, and science for grades 4 and 8. Okay, the ELA and math state exams are only to be administered to hybrid students. This is from the state guidance. We are only allowed to give state exams to those students who come into the building for school. And kids do not need to come in on a different day. It will happen in their regular schedule of them coming in. We are not doing computer-based testing. There is no, for kids in the building or outside the building, there is no testing of remote-only students. If your child is a remote-only student, they are not getting tested at all. And we will be doing a familiar paper-based assessment per the state guidance here. We will have a dress rehearsal. This is where we do a little practice, a practice test, a mock exam with students, with staff, the week of April 12th. So this is our first week back in the building. And frankly, it's not exactly how we would want to spend our part of our first week back in the building. We would not want to necessarily devote time to this. And we also want to make sure that children and staff feel set up and supported and ready for the actual exam, which is slotted to happen the following week. So this will be a slightly shorter than usual exam on practice exam, so to speak, the week of April 12th on Tuesday and on Thursday. It will allow us to just give kids a chance to kind of get back into that mindset, give teachers and leaders, frankly, a chance to go through the schedule, the proctoring, the room setup, right, for students who have accommodations, for example, or get a test read to them as part of their IEP or are in a smaller group size. We need to make sure that we have everything set up for that and that we are familiar with it before the actual exam. Then the week of April 19th, we have the ELA exam. Each student will only have one day of an exam. The 2 dates are for the 2 cohorts. but there's only one day, and it is all multiple choice this year, which is an adjustment from previous years, which was a combination of multiple choice and constructive response, written response. And math will be the week of May 3rd, on the 4th for cohort A and the 6th for cohort B. I also want to take a moment here to just talk about our kind of philosophical approach to this twist in a year of twists. The state has been pretty clear that this is not to evaluate schools. This is not to evaluate children. This is strictly to collect data, to understand where children are at, and make sure we can respond accordingly. Great. That's what the state is saying. I want to say quite clearly from Hebrew Public that we are not going to use these scores to determine promotion to the next grade or retention in this grade. You are not going to see these scores on your child's report card or as part of their like long-term academic legacy. And I say that to name the fact that there are families who I've already spoken with who are concerned that their child is not going to perform well, and that in this year of like interrupted schooling, is it fair to test kids and to evaluate kids in this way? We have to. This is the guidance from the state. We are going to implement it, and we are going to create a really safe, loving, supportive testing environment for your child, so that they feel comfortable. They know we believe in them. This is an opportunity. That's it. It is not a high pressure, high stakes scenario in the way that I think some folks, ourselves included at various points, have approached state exams in previous years. We're going to try to do our best. We're going to make sure that the building is set up. We're going to make sure that teachers are set up and that kids feel confident. And we're focusing on them feeling confident, not that they get one more minute of test prep in before exam day. All that being said, I'll add just one more piece. Families have also reached out already about wanting to opt out. And any year, this is an option for families. If families, there's some families that philosophically simply don't believe in the state exams, or for any number of reasons. And in the letter that you received on Tuesday, there was a form. Should you choose to opt your child out of the exam, you simply fill out the form. You'll have the option for them to complete that day, either remotely, they'll have assigned work to function as attendance at home, or they can also come in if childcare is an issue, and we'll monitor them in the building while they complete the work while the other kids take the exams. That is your choice, and we respect it. It is a choice that you may or may not make for your family. Please know, however, that we will do everything in our power. We are committed to making a beautiful, almost joyful, if state exams can be a joyful experience, this is going to be a joyful, beautiful, loving experience for your child, should you choose to have them take it, and it will not be held against them in any way. And it'll just give us one more piece of information of how your child is doing. We'll share that with you, and we'll continue to try to support them as best as possible. Okay, next slide.
Okay, so Emily, thank you for that. Before we actually turn to looking ahead to next school year and this summer, I also want to just briefly discuss something that's come up where we frequently hear from families, and I certainly appreciate and understand this. Why only 2 days a week of in-person? Right? So we're coming back, but why not come back 4 days? Why not come back 5 days? Let me share a little bit about it. And I don't think my answers are going to satisfy everyone, but I do want you to know that we're doing everything we can to try to balance serving everyone as well as we can. So the first thing I want to point out is about half of our families are not yet ready to send their children back to school. We made a decision, which Emily referred to before. We're not doing what's called simulcasting. We're not making the children who are in the remote program sit and watch a classroom where the children who are there are getting direct attention from the teacher and they're not. We have two different groups of teachers serving two different groups of children. And that is difficult. It is expensive. It is high quality, and it is one of the things that prevents us, just one, from being able to serve the children who are in person more days a week in person. We did stretch to do this for our kindergartners who are getting 4 days a week of in person, and it meant hiring twice as many kindergarten teachers as we had originally planned to have in our budget. Similarly, we made a decision, as Emily noted, to spend some money to subsidize childcare for families who really, in some cases, just need to not be home. They need to be at a place of work and they need a safe space for their child to be. We've made a number of choices, in other words, that ensure that no one's fully satisfied with what we're doing, but we're trying to individualize and meet as many needs as possible. That's kind of been our ethos here. We've hired other additional staff this year, not only extra kindergarten teachers, but intervention teachers and floater teachers and just more staff to try to provide more support. Notwithstanding that, for example, in some of our classrooms, we are required to have 2 teachers in the classroom, a special education teacher who's directly attending to some of the IEP-based needs of children with special needs in that class, and a general ed teacher. And we literally are not allowed to divide that in order to create, oh, here's another classroom where we can have 1 teacher there and 1 teacher there. So there are legal constraints and programmatic constraints, dollar constraints. I want to assure you, we are spending a lot more money to really try to serve everyone as well as we can during this pandemic, including on, for example, on things like COVID testing that we've been spending $3,000 a week for at the school to help keep everybody safe. The other thing on this is many of you have heard, as did we, that the CDC relaxed its guideline on social distancing between students, not between adults. Their guidance on adults is still 6 feet. That they relaxed it to 3 feet. And a number of parents have come forward, understandably, and said, well, why can't we then bring more kids in? I wish it were that simple. If you look closely at the CDC guideline, and this is one of the things that's been driving educators and union folks and others crazy, is it still says 6 feet during periods of hallway transitions, during periods of arrival and dismissal, during assemblies and other larger gatherings, and this is critical, when kids are eating. So if you think about that in a facility like Harlem that has its own space challenges, we are not able to make a rapid shift where suddenly we like double the number of days or double the number of children in a classroom. Our operations team and our program team are looking super closely at this. We're consulting with other schools and with the New York City Charter School Center. We're looking at the research. We're mapping out classrooms. I can't make any promises on this in terms of this spring as to whether it will enable us to do more days. I hope that it can. We just don't know yet. So that said, let's turn to summer next year. And here's what I think is going to be good news. Again, we don't control the pandemic, right? In a lot of ways, the pandemic is controlling all of us. That said, I think, and a lot of us who look at these data closely and look at the trend lines closely, that I think there will be a full-time return to in-person schooling 5 days a week come September. I can't guarantee it, right? I can't deliver it if the data don't allow it, if public health officials or government don't allow it, but that's what we think is going to happen. And of course, we have to contingency plan. We're going to plan for that as plan A, and we know we'll need a plan B and probably a plan C. The other thing is, children have suffered this year in ways that are really unprecedented. They've suffered in terms of academic gaps, because we know, it pains us, but we know that the kind of instructional program that we're able to provide this year just isn't as good as what we would do in a normal year, as hard as our team is working, as smart as they are in terms of what we're delivering. We also know that children are facing socialization gaps, meeting new people in person, being part of a classroom community in person, playing in person, right? And we know that for some children, there's really been trauma, loss of family members, home situations that are really challenging, either economically or in other ways. We know it's been traumatic. And so for many children, there are also mental health needs. One of the things we're looking to for this summer is to put our dollars to work, resources and partnerships and staff time to address those areas of need. And I'm going to ask Emily Fernandez to speak a little bit about that.
Great. So this was really started just as an idea of how we could support the many needs of our kids after June. We know that the summer, July and August, can both present for some folks like a really wonderful freeing time. And for other families, and really, I think many more families in this particular time period, a challenge, a loss of socialization, a loss of academic stimulus, a loss of some of the mental health support. Harlem, in addition to having 2 full-time social workers and 2 culture deans, we also have 3 social work interns who provide additional on-site support for our kids' emotional needs and socialization. That's all gone after they leave us at the end of the school year for, on the one hand, a much deserved break, but on the other hand, it can be challenging. So we are working really closely with a number of folks on a multifaceted approach to summer programming that we hope is going to be a big support to our families. We're looking at some summer programming and some partnering with summer camps that we would help subsidize for families. It's just for fun. That's, gives kids a chance to socialize, connect with other kids, get outside, and really looking for partners that we really respect there. Also, an exciting piece about that is our team has been working to ensure that Hebrew would be interwoven into the summer camp. So pretty neat opportunity to both get the fun socialization piece and continue Hebrew exposure in a meaningful way over the summer. We're also looking at academic support. So we would traditionally run a small summer school for our most at-risk kids, and looking to expand that and to partner with some folks outside of our school community who might be even better at it, or might do this for their full-time gig. And so for our kids who are really academically struggling, making sure that we have some academic support there if families want to opt into it, and really encouraging it that we take advantage of that. Small group tutoring, potentially some one-on-one tutoring. How can we give kids kind of a step forward so that they come into September a little bit ahead of where they thought they would be, instead of having just lost 2 months from any academic exposure. And then the third piece that we're looking at is how to support our kids who have experienced some of the most trauma and who are just having some emotional challenges right now, families that are going through emotional challenges and who we've potentially been doing at-risk counseling. We've been doing family connecting this whole year. Do we want to just back away for 2 months, 2.5 months? Does that feel right? It doesn't. And so we're looking into how to partner with some outside resources. And I mentioned that the summer camp would be subsidized. These more at-risk programs around trauma support or academic support for our at-risk kids and families who really need it, we'd be looking to just offer that without any cost to families, because we do believe that that's a significant need. And so we're working to partner with that, to fundraise around that. We hope to be speaking with you all in much greater detail in a month, 2 months, but we wanted to at least preview it for you now. We can go to the next slide.
I am excited to just talk a little bit more about some of the things that we're thinking about for Harlem. And you'll see it says on here this spring. And really, I just wanted to highlight that again, though many of the things we already shared, there's a lot that we learned this year. And as hard as this year has been, there have been a lot of lessons that are going to just help us be better and better and better as a community moving forward. Some things that come to mind are Hakeem learning. We launched just this spring our Israeli studies classes, co-taught by a general education teacher and a Hebrew teacher. And that has been going on this week in advisory, and it's amazing. And it's bringing some cross-cultural connections that we see really beautifully. We have launched assemblies before schools closed last year. We had done maybe 2 or 3 middle school assemblies, but we hadn't done any of these school-wide assemblies. We hadn't done anything with our kindergartners. And also, we've launched this year significantly more cultural celebrations with our communities, from Native American Heritage Month, which was new for us to celebrate this year, Latinx Heritage Month, which was also new for us to celebrate this year. And we're excited to continue that and to build on that and grow. And bring that to our future. And we're also really excited, as we look to the fall and next year and just being in the same place and hopefully this idea that classes get to mix with each other. And if so, we want to bring back Olam Hour, which was sort of a larger scale Hugim that talked not just about Hebrew, but also any type of learning. And we've had little doses in the spring. One of our seventh grade teachers teaches a group of kids Korean, but our Olam Hour is really this like elective special hour for all kids once a week. And we're looking forward to bringing that back. We are looking forward to continuing assemblies. We are looking forward to continuing small groups. We launched this year our math small groups on Wednesdays, and we've really been using since January, utilizing breakout rooms in our remote classrooms and really trying to focus in on small group learning. And we're excited to do that even more so. We're excited to take our learning from our data days that Emily Fernandez mentioned, and how do we do those in smaller ways and bigger ways next year. And we're also really excited to launch some clubs and after school sports, especially for our middle schoolers who've been at the school a little bit longer and deserve something a little bit special to explore. And I think it's going to be amazing. I think particularly because we're by the end of April, we're going to have our school mascot, which we've never had before. And I think it's just going to bring us a lot of good luck as we, I am a little competitive, but as we go into school sports and things like that next year. I also, if we could go to our next slide, I'm excited for us, our eighth graders, to go on the Capstone Israel trip. It was not able to happen this year in the era of COVID with travel restrictions and things like that. And we're already looking forward to planning next year. And I know there are some spots that are going to be saved for some of our eighth graders. And we're really, really looking forward to that sort of culminating opportunity for our eighth graders to take their Hebrew learning, to take their Israeli studies learning, and put it into practice alongside other eighth graders from other Hebrew public schools, which is always exciting to middle schoolers looking to socialize, and take it to Israel and get to interact with peers and business leaders and see and experience this country they've been learning about for years and years and years. And so we're really excited for that to come back as well. And so with that, John, I'm going to pass it over to you for some closing thoughts.
Thank you, Emily, and thank you both Emilys for sharing so clearly and passionately about our work. I also want to add, if there are prospective families online, folks who've applied and are hoping to get an offer of admission and then making a decision about whether to come or not, that the summer camp program that Emily Fernandez mentioned is also going to have an opportunity for new families. So for example, if you're applying for a child who's entering kindergarten, we're looking to create an August program, again, with a Hebrew, fun Hebrew component, where for a week or two in August, your child would have the opportunity to come to that camp for free as an entree in terms of getting their level of readiness up, getting them to meet peers, get a little taste of Hebrew, learn a little bit about what our community is about before starting the school year formally. So some closing thoughts. Our values, the Olam values, Olam being an acronym for outstanding problem solving, lifelong learning, aware communication, and together through those things making a difference, is also the Hebrew word for world. And we think of our Harlem Hebrew community as a small world. And the things that make our school different, all of our small number of schools, are not only those values, but our commitments to teaching modern Hebrew and the study of Israel, our emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion, serving children from all different backgrounds and working together to break down lines of difference and learn to communicate and learn about each other, and individualized help for every child so they all can succeed academically, socially, and ultimately in college and career. We remain committed to all of those things. We hope that those of you who are part of our small school community have experienced that this year, even with all the challenges. And as part of our commitment to communication, we're sharing here each of our email addresses. Many of you, I recognize some of the names among the attendees tonight, have emailed us in the past. I hope you all have experienced what we commit to, which is we get back to you within a day or two at the outside. We do our best to answer every question that comes our way. School-specific questions, you can email Ms. Carson. Program model questions, Ms. Fernandez. Jonathan Worley, our terrific Chief Operations Officer, can help answer things like about health and safety or facilities. And if you have mission or strategy questions or questions about the charter school sector, you can always reach out to me. If you reach out to one of us, the worst that can happen is we direct you to someone on our team who might have a better answer or be in a better position to help. Again, I want to thank all of you for either contemplating being part of the Harlem Hebrew community or for being part of that community. And we really hope we see you back next year. Thanks so much.
And I'll just echo John. Thank you all for being here with us and just taking this time out of your Thursday evening. Our time is precious, especially when it means that you're going to be on a screen for a little bit longer. So we appreciate you and thank you. And please know you can always reach out and really default. The only email you really need to remember is mine, because if you don't remember anyone else's, I will pass you off. You could reach out and say, Miss Emily, who was that person who was speaking at the town hall? I'd like to talk to them. Send them and I'll pass it right along. So please feel free to reach out with anything you need, and thank you. We appreciate you. Enjoy your evening.